Thank you for joining us for today's presentation. Before we begin, I'd like to mention a couple of housekeeping items. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but questions may be asked by typing them into the question box on the webinar toolbar at any time. Questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Participation in today's webinar is worth 1 CES credit only, and points will be applied to your transcript within 1 week. I am honored to welcome today's speaker, Cliff Johnson, Senior Trade Specialist in the Office of Cargo and Commercial Sealift at the Maritime Administration. Cliff has been with the U.S. Department of Transportation Maritime Administration in Washington, D.C. since December 2013. He has over 30 years maritime industry experience, including an executive position as Vice President of Sales and Marketing for United Maritime Group in Tampa, Florida. In that role, he was responsible for customer contracts with revenues of more than $350 million annually for the ocean, inland barging, and terminal divisions. Cliff started his career at Lakes Brothers Steamship Company, a U.S. flagship owner in New Orleans, after graduating with a BS in Marine Transportation from SUNY Maritime College. We are very excited to have him here and present this webinar for you today. So without further delay, I would like to get the presentation started and turn it over to Cliff.
Okay, thanks, Cecilia. So I'm also joined here today with Mike Hocana, who's also with the Maritime Administration. He's been with MARAD for 23 years, and then Jan Downing, who's been with MARAD for 10 years. As Cecilia just said, I've only been there a year, so I brought them along just in case I get stumped on any of the questions, and they can fill in some of the blanks at the end, perhaps. So just to be clear, we work for the Maritime Administration, which is part of the Department of Transportation. We don't work for the Federal Maritime Commission. That's a different organization altogether. FMC, of course, you guys are, I'm sure, all very familiar with. You know, they work with the shipping public and common carriers to make sure, you know, all the stakeholders are abiding by the Shipping Act of 1984 and other federal statutes and that type of thing. The Maritime Administration is more of a promotional agency, and what we are doing is working to try to improve the U.S. maritime or marine transportation system, which includes U.S. flag carriers. And one of the ways that we do that, of course, is through the cargo preference laws and statutes that we'll talk about today. So first off, you know, who should attend this presentation? I mean, let me just tell you what we have found is that most of the questions that we receive are from freight forwarders, usually government sales representatives or compliance officers. We also receive quite a few calls from overseas freight forwarders asking about U.S. government-impelled cargoes, because generally the foreign offices are more confused about that than anyone. You know, so what we're hoping is if your company is currently involved or hopes to be involved in the shipping of government-impelled cargo, that you'll learn something here today about how the cargo preference statutes work. The federal statutes that we'll be talking about apply to exports, imports, and foreign-to-foreign moves, which is something that we wanted to point out, that a lot of times people are thinking government-impelled cargoes are only going to work for cargo that's moving to and from the United States that's controlled by the government, when in fact it's anything that the government's involved in, the U.S. government's involved in, is in fact part of the cargo preference statute. So if you're working directly with the government agency, clearly that's going to be cargo preference. Or if you're working with contractors that have government contracts, or even their subcontractors, those people are all subject to these statutes. So what is cargo preference? So we'll talk more specifically about the statutes in a moment, but generally this is a good general description of cargo preference, essentially reservation of government cargo for U.S. flag carriers. So a frequent question we receive is how do you know if cargo preference applies? And again, it's sort of what I just said a moment ago. I mean, if you think the U.S. government's involved, either directly or indirectly, you can be fairly certain that cargo preference is going to apply, even if it's a government loan. So there's no actual government funds being given for a grant or something like that. If it's a government loan guarantee, where the government is just standing behind the project or whatever it is with a guarantee, that's also subject to cargo preference. So they may not lay out any money, but it's just a guarantee. So the best thing that we would tell you is if you ever have any doubts about if cargo preference does apply, you can give us a call, and we'll give you our contact information and all at the end of the presentation. But if you have any doubts, you should contact us and clear up those doubts. A little bit of why cargo preference. Well, first of all, it is the law, and the reason Congress passed these laws is to support the commercially owned and operated U.S. flag fleet, to provide essential sea lift for national emergencies, and to provide the seafarers to operate government-owned cargo ships in time of national emergency. And just as a side point, the Military Sea Lift Command has government-owned vessels that are crewed and operated by civilian mariners, and the Maritime Administration has, gosh, I think probably 60 vessels. How many vessels do we have in sort of the ready reserve fleet? Is that?
Right now it's 50.
50. Okay, so about 50 vessels in a ready reserve status that can be broken out in 5 to 10 day type of status. Those vessels require mariners. So those mariners we get off the active U.S. flag fleet. So that's part of the reason why having a U.S. flag fleet is important. So the major cargo preference statutes that we're going to be talking about, the Military Cargo Preference Act of 1904, that covers cargoes owned or destined to the U.S. military, and I'll talk a little bit more in depth about that in a few minutes. The Cargo Preference Act of 1954, which covers agencies other than the Department of Defense, and then Public Resolution 17, which covers the XM Bank. Military, under the Military Cargo Preference Act of 1904, 100% has to move U.S. flag. XM Bank is 100% of eligible cargoes, which is currently financed projects and any guarantees that the XM Bank has over $20 million or 7 years or longer. So that's 100% of all finance projects, and then separately everything that's over $20 million or 7 years or longer. And then all other agencies are subject to at least 50% of their cargoes on U.S. flag vessels under the Cargo Preference Act of 1954. So before we really get into talking about the cargo preference statutes, I'd like to highlight some of the points from the Shipping Act. The Shipping Act, of course, covers the duties and responsibilities of freight forwarders. And the primary duty of the freight forwarders, as you all know, is to comply with the laws of the United States. And this includes the cargo preference statutes. The last point shown here is worth noting, and as you probably know, U.S. flag shipping rates are generally higher than foreign flag shipping rates. So if a forwarder or a shipper decides to ignore the cargo preference laws and book foreign to save money, you could be in violation of the Shipping Act. And so you can see here it says obtaining transportation at less than applicable rates by means of false classification to obtain a lower rate is against the law. And so we've seen some shippers ignore the cargo preference law because of U.S. flag rate was too high. This really creates a problem. It creates a problem for the shipper, for the forwarder, and for us. So and we prefer to avoid that, and we're going to talk about how to avoid situations like that. So a lot of you probably have never heard of the Maritime Administration, or if you have, you've never had any dealings with us, and so you're probably wondering why is MARAD suddenly showing up and talking about this, and so there has been a change. In 2009, the Cargo Preference Statute was revised to include a civil penalty. While we haven't imposed any penalties yet, we're stepping up our enforcement activities. Prior to 2009, there was really no penalty for violating the cargo preference law, which, to paraphrase Alexander Hamilton, and I've got it up there, but I'll paraphrase, the law amounted to nothing more than a recommendation. So now the law is really something that people have to pay attention to, because there, in fact, the civil penalty is there. But let me say what I said a bit ago, is that our goal is not to impose a penalty, but what we want to do is figure out a way to work with the carriers, work with the forwarders, work with the shippers, make everybody aware of what they need to do, and put this together so that we aren't trying to impose penalties. But I'll say that this authority that we've been given to impose the penalties is very, very broad, and the new civil penalty can be applied, as you can see there, to any person, which includes shippers, contractors, freight forwarders, NVOCCs, or anyone that's violating the law. So it is a very, very broad statute. So now we'll talk a little bit more about the specific laws, cargo preference laws. This slide here is on the military cargoes, the Military Cargo Preference Act of 1904. So essentially, this applies to all cargo procured for, intended for use by, or owned by the U.S. military. So this means everything from fresh fruits and vegetables that are going to the troops to ammunition and tanks. Department of Defense ships a huge amount of cargo directly, but they also ship using many contractors. And the more important thing to remember is that 100% of this cargo is to move by U.S. flag vessels unless not available. But the availability is to be determined by the Department of Defense, the contracting officer, and generally in consultation with the Maritime Administration. So it's not good enough for you to determine on your own that there's a U.S. flag vessel not available. That's got to be done by the government. The other thing that's very important to remember is that and this is actually part of the statute and the regulations, that you must send the bills of lading for all these shipments to the Maritime Administration within 30 days of the shipment. And that includes, if there are ever any waivers as a result of non-availability, you've got to send the foreign flag bills of lading as well as the U.S. flag bills of lading. And what we'd like to see is a freighted master bill of lading as opposed to an NVOCC bill of lading, and so we'd like to actually see the bill of lading from the actual shipper or carrier. The next thing is the Cargo Preference Act of 1954. This applies to essentially everything else. So you have the DoD cargoes, and then you have all of the civilian agencies and all the other cargoes. Now, just to clarify, there is occasionally you may have a foreign military financed cargo that may be going to a foreign military that you may see a U.S. government agency, or could be the DoD, could be a private contractor, somebody shipping military goods to a foreign military. And if it's financed by the U.S. government, which generally those type of moves are, that is also subject to cargo preference, but it's not subject to the 1904 Act. It's actually subject to the 1954 Act. Most of the other cargo shipped under the 54 Act, the non-military type of cargo, is really shipped by commercial entities. Somebody that may have a grant or an agreement with the government, possibly a loan guarantee, and it may look and feel like a commercial movement, but if the government's involved through one of these other ways, a grant or agreement, a loan guarantee, then at least 50% has to move U.S. flag. Foreign military. Actually, I'm being written a note here. Foreign military finance is 100%. It is. Okay. All right. Well. Okay. So my colleagues here. Okay. So let me correct something I said. Government. So foreign military financed cargo. So that is cargo that is military cargo that may be going to a foreign government, to their military, and it's financed by the U.S. government. That actually does require 100%. Okay, sorry, thanks for that clarification. That's why I have these guys here. So back to the 54 Act here. So I just want to reiterate something I said on the 04 Act, that we with this cargo, the 50%, and it's at least 50%, we want to see all the freighted master bills of lading, and we want to see those for both the U.S. flag shipments and the foreign flag shipments. That's the only way that we can calculate, of course, what the percentage that moved on a U.S. flag vessel. And we've got a report that shows up in our annual report. It's we many times report it to Congress. I don't know if that's a requirement. Do we have to report it to Congress? Yeah. So we report to Congress on an annual basis. So we need to have that information. So now the other type of shipments that I was talking about are the export-import bank shipments. And this is slightly different than the 54 Act or the 1904 Act. It's handled under Public Resolution number 17, PR 17, which states that 100% is to move via U.S. flag. But there are some exceptions. Essentially, 100% of the cargo that's financed moves by U.S. flag, and then 100% of the cargo with loan guarantees over $20 million in 7 years is to be shipped by U.S. flag. And again, it's if available. I mean, there is always a chance if a vessel's not available, then there would be a determination of that fact. You as a freight forwarder, your shipper, you can't do that determination. You have to come to the Maritime Administration, and we'll determine if there's a U.S. flag vessel available or not available. And we'll talk a little bit about how we go through, what we would like to do before getting to that point. It really is just discussing these shipments as early as possible, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But again, under the PR 17, we want to see the bills of lading within 30 days to the Maritime Administration. I've put up here some quotes off the Ex-Im Bank website, and actually this information really holds true for any cargo preference. Ex-Im Bank is a very cooperative agency with us, and they've put this information up there. They encourage their shippers and the forwarders and all that are involved in this to work closely with MARAD, and they do. But you can see, the Export-Import Bank, advertises that MARAD offers facilitation services to assist forwarders, exporters, and foreign buyers with obtaining suitable shipping arrangements on U.S. flag vessels. Obviously, included in that is working with the freight forwarders. Ex-Im Bank and MARAD encourage the use of advanced shipping plans, which again, this is on the Ex-Im Bank website. We'd love to see this for any cargo preference. As soon as your customer knows that they have an agreement that involves government funding or financing or a guarantee, hopefully they have an idea of what they're going to be shipping, and the earlier you provide that to the Maritime Administration and start essentially your shopping for U.S. flag carriers, the better off you're going to be. You're going to end up with a better rate. You're going to end up with a better service, is what our experience is. Then Ex-Im goes on to say, Ex-Im Bank strongly encourages exporters and foreign buyers to contact U.S. flag carriers as early as possible. So that's essentially reiterating what I just said. So as any program or anything you do, there's always issues. So I'll just run through these one by one. So understanding the law before bidding on a government contract and including the appropriate costs for U.S. flag services. This is something that we find happens very often, is that somebody will be awarded some project, maybe building an embassy overseas or any type of project where the U.S. government is funding, there's U.S. government funding involved, and the company that wins the award either didn't know about cargo preference, neglected to talk to a freight forwarder about what it would mean, maybe talk to their freight forwarder and got indicative rates for the move, but failed to tell you that there was government financing involved, and they end up winning the award as a result of it. It's really a tough situation for contractors to be in, and it really sets them up for failure. So this is one of the strongest things we can tell you, is to work with your customers to make sure that they understand what they're getting into if they're getting a government contract, that the cargo preference laws do apply. Understanding the law and reporting the bills of lading. We've really talked about that. I mean, reporting bills of lading is very important to us. It helps us know what's going on, and actually it is part of the law as well. Contracts, especially with some subcontractors that do not specifically mention the cargo preference requirement, are still subject to the law. So this is also a problem, is that we've seen somebody gets an award, they're going to build an embassy somewhere, they subcontract with somebody to supply the cement or some particular component that's required for the project. But in that subcontract, they fail to mention that cargo preference applies. And the subcontractor goes out, they secure the business, they may ship it on a foreign flag vessel. That's going to be in violation of law, and that creates problems. And then we'll work with the contractors on trying to get them compliant, but it really sort of puts everybody behind the 8 ball. And again, it's the same situation if they'd gone to the subcontractor and explained the cargo preference and put it into their contract. Hopefully that subcontractor would have done some research and found out how much the U.S. flag vessel was going to cost, and would have been able to put that in their bid. Foreign-to-foreign moves are subject to the law. This is another point that comes up often. And many times it's a foreign freight forwarder that's involved with a move, and many of these foreign freight forwarders actually have U.S. offices, and so this is an area that we can't stress enough, that foreign-to-foreign moves and the foreign freight forwarders, the shippers all have to comply with U.S. law. Even though it may not be moving to and from the U.S., it still is part of the cargo preference laws. And I just have a note here, non-compliant shippers have had significant financial adjustments to contracts, and that's typically been Department of Defense, but it could hold true with anything, that there would be an equitable adjustment based on the fact that you bid on it, you were supposed to use U.S. flag, and potentially your contract could be in jeopardy. Lack of early collaboration with transportation and acquisition personnel to resolve procurement conflicts. Again, that's just what we would like to see is, as soon as the shipper, the contractor, the forwarder know that they have government financing, government dollars involved, they should start the process of dealing with the U.S. flag carriers, dealing with the Maritime Administration, and trying to make the best plans that you can based upon what you know at that point in time. Don't wait until the last minute. Try to engage as early as possible. Lack of proper education of contracting officers, shippers, freight forwarders to ensure all are well versed in cargo preference requirements. That's essentially why we're here today. We're trying to spread the word to the freight forwarders. We've been working with contracting officers, which there's thousands of contracting officers in the government. It's probably 1,000 just in DOD. It's a lot of work to be done to make sure that everybody's aware of it. But that's we're here to we're with the government. We're here to help. Here. Oh, okay. Okay. The next thing I have, understanding fair and reasonable. So, as I mentioned earlier, U.S. flag shipping rates tend to be higher than foreign flag rates, but this is not sufficient basis to consider the U.S. flag as unreasonable. The Maritime Administration will work with you and work with the U.S. flag carrier or carriers to ensure that the rate makes sense. So MARAD, in doing so, will consider what I have up here, the comparison of U.S. flag rates charged on comparable routes, historical rate data, rates obtained by MARAD from the shipper, from the forwarder, whatever you can provide to us, rates obtained by MARAD from the carriers. And this is an important point too, efficiency of the operation regardless of the rate differential. So the suitability of what the U.S. flag carrier is offering is also going to be questioned and looked at. So in other words, if if you have if somebody's offering a bulk ship to carry 40,000-ton bulk ship to carry 5 containers to Africa just on its own, that's not really going to be an efficient operation and the most reasonable way to move that cargo. So we will take that into consideration. And then of course we'll have a discussion with the carriers on the justification of the rate, ensuring that that what they're doing is a reasonable pricing structure based on what their costs and so forth are. Again, I state here, early engagement with potential U.S. flag carriers will provide the shipper with the best opportunity to negotiate a better rate and overall best outcome. And so I've said that several times, and I can't stress that enough. MARAD outreach. So we're a promotional agency. As I said earlier, we want to work with the carriers, the shippers, the forwarders. We really don't want to be assessing civil penalties. That's really not, we haven't really achieved our goal if that's what we're doing. We've achieved our goal if we've worked with you to get the cargo on U.S. flag vessels and that you're satisfied with that you understand why you've had to ship on a U.S. flag vessel, you understand, and been able to come up with the most efficient type of way to do it. We want to work with all the parties involved. Let me just look through here the screen. So establishing business relationships with the U.S. flag carriers. So if you provide us, you see their past cargo leads to the carriers. If you provide us what I talked about earlier, a shipping plan, if you provide us that a year in advance of when you're going to be doing your shipping, we'll actually forward that on to the carriers. We'll discuss it with you and make sure that that's what you want us to do. But we, again, feel that it's important to get this information in the hands of the carriers as early as possible so that you get the widest range of carriers interested and you get the best service possible. We want to establish relationships with the key shippers, which, of course, there are many shippers that are dealing with the government, many contractors dealing with the government. Of course, there are some that are obviously much bigger than others, and those we're trying to build the relationships. We're trying to build a relationship with freight forwarders and the other OTIs. As I said before, we want to be a resource for the shippers, the forwarders, and the OTIs. And we want to provide early advice on potential cargo movements. I'm just reading the bullets here, which you guys can read the bullets just as easy as I can. But freight forwarders and other OTIs should work closely with the shipper to ensure it's understood which party is responsible for cargo preference compliance. And you see here I said MARAD encourages freight forwarders and OTIs to take on this role. That would be supplying the bills of lading. It would be working with the Maritime Administration and the U.S. flag carriers. We feel that the freight forwarders are in a much better position than a contractor to be working in this environment. And so we would hope that the freight forwarders would take on this role and encourage your clients, your shippers, to allow you to take on the role of providing this information and the interaction with the Maritime Administration and the U.S. flag carriers. Report all government-impelled shipments, both U.S. flag and foreign flag. We've talked about that already. Work with U.S. flag carriers and MARAD early. We've talked about that. Understand the shipper's contract and government and make with the government and make a shipping plan. So there's 2 points there really is knowing what the shipper's contract entails, what the requirements are, talking to them about subcontractors, but then making a shipping plan and understanding where cargo is coming from and what's taking place. And then sharing that as early as possible with the carriers and the Maritime Administration. So that really brings us to the end. I've got here, and I understand this presentation was already provided to you. So there's a list of folks within the organization. You can call any of us, and we'll get you to the right person to answer the questions. We look forward to working with any and all of you, and hope that this information was helpful. Now I understand are there a couple of questions?
There's 2 questions.
Okay.
A couple of questions, and we encourage you to write your questions in at this time. So the first question is, on a foreign-to-foreign move where it seems U.S. flag service is available, what is the best course of action for the freight forwarder?
Okay, so if there's U.S. flag service available, you know, that I'm not quite sure I understand where the problem is, but yeah, I mean, Mike,
I think some people think that cardinal preference does not apply in foreign
Right.
service, but it does. It does. So if cardinal preference applies, then they should still be using the U.S. Flag Vessel in foreign service. If they have trouble finding a U.S. Flag Vessel, they can contact us and we'll help.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
All right, next question.
Does MARAD regulate U.S. intercoastal moves, and if so, does it only apply to U.S.-owned or financed cargo?
Okay, you got that one, Mike.
Basically, the Maritime Administration doesn't regulate intercoastal waterway moves. The agency that has enforcement over disputes in that area is the Surface Transportation Board. Now, the federal government could at any time regulate that intercoastal industry, license it, and what have you, but has chosen not to for now. So there's no licensing or regulating of the intercoastal waterway trade then.
But now regulate, though, could also apply to, like, Customs and Border Patrol on the Jones Act. Is that, you're sort of talking?
Yeah,
right. But yeah, MARAD doesn't. MARAD doesn't have any regulatory responsibilities there. But yeah, you'd mentioned Surface Transportation Board. It depends on what type of regulation you're looking for. It could be Customs and Border Patrol, or it could be the Coast Guard.
Right, which does up the rivers and things
like
that.
Right.
Okay. This is going back to the first question. The person said that they mistyped. They said, on a foreign-to-foreign move where it seems no U.S. flag service is available, what is the best course of action for the freight forwarder?
That makes more sense. So what we would do is you provide us with the information on what the move is. And again, don't wait until the 11th hour, because what we're going to do is we're going to send out essentially a message to all the U.S. flag carriers saying that this opportunity is out there. Does anybody have a vessel in the region? And so if somebody came back, you know, and had a vessel, then essentially we'll go through that list of criteria, you know, including looking to see if it's an efficient use of the vessel and it's an efficient service, you know, and we'll consider the rate and all that type of thing. But many times we'll nobody, you know, no U.S. flag carrier will have an interest, in which case then essentially you'll get a waiver from that requirement.
Okay, thank you. Is there a list of U.S. flag ocean carriers listed somewhere?
On our website.
Yeah, there's a list on our website with contact names and I think it's got contact names, phone numbers, and email addresses. Right. Yeah.
And the ship names too.
And the ship names. You know, but you know, again, you know, if I were a forwarder, I would actually, as opposed to going through the list, because there's quite a few U.S. flag carriers on the list. Yeah. But I always find, you know, if industry were to give us what the requirement is, we have it already. We can just shoot it out as an email, and it's very simple for MARAD to take the lead on that, and then come back. Actually, we could do it one of two ways. We could have the information come back to us, and we feed it back to you. But actually, the preferred way would be to provide your contact information and send it out to all the U.S. flag carriers in one email with whatever the requirement was, and then they'll come back to you directly with copy to us, so we can see if you got any responses.
Right, and there's no obligation either. If you find another U.S. flag carrier that we didn't mention, or someone else contacts you, that's fine. So there's no obligation to use MARAD services.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Another area within MARAD, how long would an application for visa preference take?
To become a visa member, there's an annual open season. And we're not the office that deals directly with that, but if you can send that to us in an email, we'll get that to the right party, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
That's the only question. Those are the only questions that we have right now. We can give it another minute to see if any other questions come in, since we do have a little bit more time. Yeah.
So just Mike O'Connor was the one that you heard me answering part of the questions. Mike O'Connor. Jan, you have something you wanted to say? Yeah, so Jan Downing wants to add something.
Yes, we have just for the forwarders. There's often difficulty with the requirement to provide the freighted bills of lading from the carriers, and it's important when you're dealing with that U.S. preference cargo that you have an understanding with your customer ahead of time on how it's going to be reported to MARAD. In most cases, the freight forwarder actually sends us copies of the freighted bills of lading because you may want to keep your rates confidential and not, you don't want your customer to know what you're charging.
Yeah, if you're acting as an NDOCC in that case, yeah, then you may have released an NDOCC bill of lading to your customer, and you don't want to provide them with a copy of the actual U.S. flag carrier or whoever the carrier was, the master bill of lading. But you could provide that to us, and your shipper will not. Yeah, we never share that information. As a matter of fact, that I'm surprised that's not a question. But all of the bills of lading that we do receive are considered business sensitive, which is, I guess, business confidential has a different determination in government. But the information is never released. It can't be FOIA-able. You know, so the only time we would ever release any information from the bill of lading would be an aggregate. In other words, we may run a report with, you know, that would show how many tons moved to a particular country or something like that, but it wouldn't have any detailed information whatsoever.
And so it's important to get that ahead of time, whether you're going to, you know, deal with a percentage and give the freighted bills of lading to your customer, or if you're going to give them directly to us. And in most cases, the forwarders and the NDOCCs send the BLs to us for the customer.
Okay, we have another question that came in. Can the bill of lading being presented be an NVOCC bill of lading, or must it be an MBL by the ocean carrier?
Yeah, we're looking for the ocean carrier bill of lading. That's what Jan was just saying. Is that and so if you're acting as an NVOCC and you've released an NVOCC bill of lading to your customer, please send us the actual ocean bill of lading from the actual carrier, the vessel owner, and again, that information that's on that bill of lading, the rates, and is all kept confidential. Hopefully that answers the question.
There don't appear to be any other questions. If you think of a question later that you didn't have answered, you can definitely reach out to the appropriate person that's listed on the screen, or you can email me at nei@ncbfa.org, and I'll pass it on. I'd like to thank you all for joining, and thank you to Cliff and the Maritime Administration for your time and efforts in putting together today's webinar. I'd like to remind everyone that points will be applied to your transcript within 1 week, and to please complete the survey that was included in the webinar credential email. Thank you again for your participation, and enjoy the rest.